Hello everyone, welcome again to my YouTube channel IR 2.0, where today I want to talk about the importance of strategy and structure with respect to interventional radiology. Specifically, I want to dive into the elephant in the front room, or the perceived elephant in the front room. Now, over the span of my career, I've long heard so many of my colleagues talking about the hurdles and challenges that they face with respect to their diagnostic radiology group or the hospital administration. And again, I want to just emphasize that this discussion really is pertaining to private practice interventional radiologists who are in a mixed DR-IR group, which happens to about 80% of us. And then hopefully in this session, I want to kind of introduce the real elephant in the front room for IR with respect to the real hurdles in us being able to advance our specialty to what I see as IR 2.0. And really where we should be really focusing our energies, at least from my point of view. In this, it really starts with strategy. Over the course of my career, I've become a proponent of healthcare strategy and a student of healthcare strategy. And in fact, I feel like when we're studying all these different industries, healthcare, there's a huge void of real strategists, whether it's at all levels, whether it's the hospital administration or within a practice or a group, or even healthcare private companies, oftentimes don't have a real chief strategy officer, which I think is really missing. So in my studies, the one person that's really made a real impact on me and the way I view IR, and really has inspired me to really create the framework for IR 2.0, is Professor Clay Christensen. He unfortunately passed away earlier this year. But he was a Harvard business professor and by many regarded as one of the top business strategists of all time. He's most famous for his theory of disruptive innovation, where he came up with a very fascinating theory on how all companies in all industries are subject to disruption, where the industry leader can be disrupted by a new entrant, and he lays the foundation or the framework of how a small company on the fringe really could climb up and eventually take over market share to become the leader. And it's really relevant to all of healthcare. In fact, he's written extensively about healthcare and how healthcare has a problem structurally, and how healthcare can be disrupted, especially for the betterment of society, where services could expand at a very low cost structure. He's written this book, which I would recommend highly to anybody interested in healthcare. It's called The Innovators Prescription. And it really starts with him describing three basic models in healthcare that exist in all industries. So all companies across all industries either fall into one of these three basic business structures that have three uniquely different profit models. One is called a solutions shop, the other is called a process shop, and the third is called a facilitating network shop. And they're relevant, and I want to spend a few minutes describing these different models, because I think it will give us a lot of insight into, one, how we don't have a lot of compatibility with respect to diagnostic radiology, and certainly within a hospital structure. And number two, how we can use this structure to really create the framework for IR 2.0, and largely what we have been doing in Dayton, Ohio. Lastly, Professor Christensen talks about how if anybody can actually create a methodology by which within one industry or a specialty, in our case, can move from one shop to another, you would have significant success beyond imagination. So The first shop is called the solution shop, which is really a business model in which folks are getting a fee for service or time. It is really an advice or a consulting type of a structure. Research and development organizations, law firms, consulting firms, as well as diagnostic work that's performed commonly in a hospital. These are all examples of a solution shop. However, recommending solutions to complicated problems is usually as far as these types of business models can go. They're not really structured to act on any of their recommendations. So, definitely from my point of view, a diagnostic radiology model really falls into this type of a business model. Now, moving on, a value-added shop is a little different. The fee is for the output or productivity of the work that they're doing. Typically, this involves bringing things in that are incomplete or broken, then adding value to them, and then shipping them out once they're more repaired or more completed. Automobile manufacturing is a great example. Petroleum refining, even higher education in college is considered a value-added shop in that we go in as students and then come out with more value added. In exchange for that, we pay a tuition fee. Many medical procedures are in this category, and certainly interventional radiology would actually be in this camp as opposed to a solution shop. Traditionally, the way it's structured within a hospital. Now, a facilitated network is different from all three in that these are institutions in which the same people buy and sell, deliver and receive things from each other. Telecommunications is a good example. A fitness center or a fitness franchise like LA Fitness would be one where folks pay a membership, the same number of people stay in the group, and there's a value created both ways. Insurance companies are a good example of facilitated network business where customers put premiums into a pool and then take their claims out when they need it. And certainly facilitated networks can be a very effective business model for the care of chronic illness, as we know with the structure of HMOs now. These companies make money by usually working a very effective network that operates very efficiently and effectively. And this is where the hospital administration partially plays a role into this. And in fact, Professor Christensen talks a lot about how a hospital structure has kind of been structured in a way just out of historically necessity and not necessarily out of strategy. One of the problems that he sees with the hospitals and why long-term he believed that the hospital structure was not viable was that a hospital administrator really has to run all three of these business models simultaneously. When they have employed physicians, they have a solution shop that they're managing. They're managing operating rooms, which is a value-added service, and on top of that, they're managing hospital stays and working on a network structure that they have to manage. So he often talks about how sorry he feels for hospital administrators because he feels that it's almost an impossible task to be able to run a hospital with any long-term success. So let's kind of move on to how using this framework, how IR and DR do not really have aligned economic interests with each other. DR is really a solution shop where diagnostic radiology is the revenue stream is completely a different type of model compared to interventional radiology, which is a value-added shop. Now, historically, what we've done as an industry is to basically say, as an extension, because clinically it made sense, right, for IR to be born from diagnostic radiology because of the clinical overlap. And one of the main take-home messages is that over time, just because clinically something kind of comes from one thing doesn't mean that it has to stay there, because over time things evolve to a point where it may no longer make sense. And for DI and IR, if you think about it, one of the main problems is that IR, from a DR's perspective, is a money loser, where we spend, as IRs, spend most of our time working in the hospital on very low revenue generating work to no revenue generating work when we are called upon doing procedures on patients that maybe don't have a payer mix, we don't have a control over. In that, heck, we don't ever even look at an insurance structure in any capacity when you're working in the hospital, because we are just we know that we have to take care of all patients any and all patients that are in the hospital, and we provide the same level of care to all patients with the same amount of time commitment, energies, and resources. On top of that, there's patient care issues that are not reimbursed, which takes up a lot of time and administrative work, and then call hours that do not have special compensation attached to it. So conversely, the diagnostic radiology group is really getting paid on the RVU structure based on time, and rightfully so. That their model is just completely different. They're providing a solution, and basically in the form of their advice on their interpretation of the diagnostic study. So you can see economically, this is not a fair structure for either group. And historically, for IR to kind of blame DR is kind of nonsensical. And I am definitely guilty of doing this myself over the years, and being kind of upset with diagnostic radiologists in my hospital, where I felt like they just didn't understand what our value was. And from their point of view, now it makes sense that they have a completely different business model, and it's not really a fair structure to them to have to carry a minority of, because we're a minority in most groups. Maybe 10% of any radiology group in the hospital is interventional guys, and we are seen as guys who they have to carry, and you can start to see that this is a marriage that just really structurally now doesn't make any sense, because economically doesn't make any sense. Similarly, we are not superstars when it comes to profit for a hospital. No question, we are a service that has to be there. A hospital cannot function without an interventional radiology service. But here's the reality of the situation, is that we don't even come close to earning our keep in the hospital from a profitability standpoint, right? Because for many years I thought, well, okay, if the diagnostic radiology group, we have an incompatible issue with diagnostic radiology, why aren't we successful in lobbying directly to with the hospital? And many other specialties have done this, where they have so much leverage outside of their physician groups directly with the hospital, because the hospital sees them as profit centers. So maybe about 12, 13 years ago, is one of our local hospitals covering the service on our contract, and then there was a business development or a marketing person, and I would ask him, like, why not market these amazing services that we're performing? And after a couple of beers, he basically told me, hey doc, it really comes down to bones, hearts, and brains for us. And this was his basic protocol. And he goes, we're not going to get any traction if you're not in one of these three categories. And it at first it really took me back by surprise, but it makes a lot of sense now. The hospital, especially if you think about what Professor Christensen talks about in their challenges, the hospital has no hospitals have no option but to optimize some of these services where they're profit centers, and they really cannot take time to focus energies, especially on marketing and developing a structure like IR, where even though it's absolutely critically necessary, it's not something that keeps their lights on. This is a list of the top 10 physician specialties that generate the most amount of revenue, and I thought it would be kind of interesting to include here because we're certainly not on there, and there are a few on here that I was a little surprised that they're on there. Now, let's transition into what I call the real elephant in the front room for IR, which is what I think is our opportunity, right? Where if we can really focus on these few things, I feel like within the frame of what Dr. Christensen or what Professor Christensen has outlined could really be our opportunity. If we can establish the solution shop to go with our amazing value-added shop, it would be transformative. The components here are going to be the establishment of an independent clinic and the establishment of what we have established is a comprehensive clinical algorithm, right? So for us to move from proceduralists to really create the opportunity, I feel like we have to really create our own clinical infrastructure that takes advantage of the skill sets that we have, where we're providing so many different treatment options under the minimally invasive umbrella. If we can package this kind of in a different format, in the form of comprehensive services, then I think it's game, set, match for us, because we would then be providing and really moving from just being a value-added shop to now also adding that solution shop. And this is where this is something that we in Dayton have experimented on and have started to develop and have been developing successfully, I should say. And once we can do this and kind of move outside of our structure where we're just providing procedures, and this kind of just was something that came out of necessity for us. So when we first started, I would go to different referral sources and talk about the different lists of procedures that we offered. So I would say, hey, we do, peripheral vascular disease, we do pain management or kyphoplasty, and we do varicose veins and carotid stents, and on and on. And I realized that the primary care doctors, one, could not remember all of the things that we would do. The message was just all fractionated. But once we came up with this concept of comprehensive algorithm where we were really focusing on solving a problem, and we packaged it under comprehensive leg and back pain management, and we really focused on solving the clinical gaps in the industry, and really transformed ourselves from the value-added shop to a real solution shop. Boy, it changed everything. And so it's an area where I think as IRs we have a real opportunity to kind of focus on. We by doing this we've restructured the business model so that now IR really has an opportunity to become a profit center. By shifting to an outpatient lab, we now take advantage of a global fee structure, which if we manage our costs well, really can be a lucrative structure where we can really move from a specialty that in many ways we don't earn our keep in the hospital, to moving into a model in which if you look at the salary to revenue potential, could actually outperform even the top specialists that I showed you on this slide, meaning that cardiovascular surgery, according to this, demonstrates an average revenue for the hospital 3.7 million per FTE for an average salary of $425,000. And I can tell you, and I can assure you that that we can definitely out exceed that delta if we were just to kind of look at restructuring and putting our business model from the hospital into an outpatient global fee structure. But the big enchilada, the big elephant in the front room that we as a society really, really need to focus on, at least from my point of view, is patient acquisition strategy. We as interventional radiologists have so much value to share, and that information needs to now get directly to the source. We need to be in a position where we can eliminate dependency on hospitals to feed us work, and we need to be in a position where we eliminate dependency on other doctors to send us work. And we have all the attributes, at least I believe, to be able to do this. And I will try to outline more of the specifics in subsequent talks. But the take-home message that I would really like to get across in this session is that strategy is our number one friend, in that our main focus as IR doctors, outside of good clinical service, patient care, needs to be in not worrying about diagnostic radiology or the hospital, but how are we going to transform ourselves? How are we going to be in a position to directly capture patients, and how can we continue to build robust? How can we continue to build a robust patient acquisition strategy? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out today's session. Again, I would just remind you as a friendly gesture. This is a open forum, open to any kind of discussions. Definitely, if you want to continue getting these talks, subscribe to the channel, and hopefully we'll continue to be able to have meaningful conversations. So with that, I want to say thank you and take care.